Welcome back to the ARKAST Podcast, where we interview local podcasters around the state in Arkansas. Karen's with me, of course, as always.
Hello. Yes.
We also have somebody else here.
Yeah, we do. So this is Nate Disarro. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and who you are?
Sure. I guess the easiest way to put it is I've been a storyteller for a long time, and I think that term's kind of cliche these days. The majority of the way we tell our stories is through video, and then we have our own podcast, obviously, called Titans of Industry. And so I've been in Arkansas for a little over 10 years. I was actually born here, but I grew up in Dallas, lived in Denver, made my way back here to essentially start a production company. And so I've been telling the stories of Arkansans for about a decade, and it's really connected me in a lot of ways to the history of Arkansas, but also the future of Arkansas in a lot of, unique ways. And I feel really lucky that I get to do what I do, both professionally and personally, which the personal side is the podcast. It's not something that necessarily pays the bills. It's something I kind of was birthed out of getting to tell the stories of these people, and people would commission us to do that. But then I was like, there's a lot of people whose stories I want to tell, and nobody can pay me for. So I'm going to find these people. I'm going to ask them if they'll be on it, and here we are. So we've been doing Titans of Industry for a couple of years now, and it's sort of sporadic as we have time. It's certainly not as consistent as I would like for it to be, but we've gotten to do a ton of great interviews and have some incredible fun times.
Probably learned a lot too, right? Because you're interviewing some of these people that have been, they've climbed their way to the top of whatever industry that it is. I mean, that's the title of your podcast, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I kind of consider it my free MBA, if you will.
Right.
When you get to sit in front of somebody who is climbing their way to the top, and what I say is usually these are future Hall of Famers in their field, right? So when you get to sit and have these conversations with these people, of course, you're going to learn a lot. Mm-hmm. But I tell people all the time, I'm one of those people that's a mile wide and an inch deep, so I learn a lot about a lot of things. Just don't ask me to teach a seminar on it.
Right.
But it's really, that's my personality. Some people, they don't like that. They want to kind of narrow in on one thing and be hyper focused on that and learn everything there is about one subject. I don't know if it's the attention span of a squirrel or what, but I just kind of, I love to have a conversation and, learn everything I can, gain enough knowledge. It's kind of like watching a million documentaries, right? You get to kind of learn as much as an hour will teach you.
About Pablo Escobar or whatever you want to learn.
Exactly. Tomorrow we kind of move on to the next thing.
Yeah, right.
So.
That's what I love about your podcast. You now have this collection of stories from thought leaders, essentially. So it really appeals to me. And I love the sound of the podcast and everything you've put together. It sounds really great. I mean, obviously somebody in your industry, it's going to sound really great.
Well, we certainly try on the production side, to make it quality. But at the same time, one of the things I've realized, especially in the podcast world, is, I think a lot of times people they create too much of a barrier to entry to create their content. They think, well, I don't know how, or I don't have the right equipment, or whatever the case may be. And, I'm in the industry. I have the best equipment you can have, but at the same time, I don't have the time to dedicate a ton of time to it. So we just kind of started and went with the easiest setup, didn't want too many barriers to get this thing going. And sometimes, through Zoom and everything else, depending on who we're interviewing and how, the quality is just not top notch. But what I've realized, and maybe you guys have too, is generally the audience doesn't care. They want to make sure it's good enough.
Yeah.
But the great thing about a podcast is it's passive listening, right? We can do other things while we're listening to it, so we're not hyper focused on the quality. There's a threshold. It can't be too bad.
Yeah. Right.
But at the same time, we don't have to have a huge team and top-notch equipment and all that good stuff. And that's what I think is really cool about it. And I've talked to clients all the time about creating their own content and how to do it. And, the reality is you can do a lot with a little, especially today.
Yeah.
10 years ago it was a little more difficult. 20 years ago it was next to impossible. But the way technology is evolving and everybody's got the opportunity to record stuff in their pocket every day.
Yeah.
So you can do a lot with your cell phone. You can do a lot with just a small investment. There's a million ways to do it. But back to the kind of concept of the podcast. So one of the things that we do is we try not to repeat industries too often, right? Because again, attention span of a squirrel, I don't want to interview 5 doctors in a row, or I don't want to interview too many people in the same industry in a row. And that's just, again, personally kind of how I do it. So we've kind of played with the seasonal idea of season 1, season 2, season 3. Basically, that's just when we get to a big break, we're like, okay, let's start a new season. But the reality is we just kind of like to have some sort of breakup that allows us to kind of reintroduce certain industries that we've done in the past or whatever. So
you obviously had the equipment because you have a video production company and that type of thing, but you said you went with a simple setup. So what was that learning curve like from like where you are now and where you started? Because you just dove in with feet first, right, into the podcast. You're like, I've heard a few of these. I'm pretty sure I know how this goes. Let's just go for it.
Yeah, and again, I'm very fortunate in the fact that I interview people for a living, so I get paid to do that, which is always a great way to earn a living, and I do consider myself very lucky in that regard. The learning curve for the podcast side, really, to me, it was all about sort of, we needed to come up with sort of a concept, right? An intro. Do we have a little commercial in there? Because we technically are a sponsor of our own podcast, if you will. But so I've got a great team, people that help put this thing together. I literally show up, sit down, talk, and then everybody else does the work, which is, again, I'm very lucky in that regard. So I have a creative director that kind of helps get all of that together to begin with. She found the music, the artwork, all that kind of stuff. She kind of built from scratch, and so she helps produce kind of from a big picture, and then we've got a team of people that different people will handle episodes or however we do it based on schedule and availability. But as far as the learning curve of getting it out into the world, I think there's so many ways to do that now. There's a lot of platforms out there. We landed on Buzzsprout as our distribution platform. And so basically that's like the podcast version of YouTube, if you will, where it hosts the actual file. And then we just link to all the different podcast platforms from there, and it self-distributes from there automatically. Sure. So that was really the simplest way. And then recently, we just decided, ironically, being a video production company, we just decided we're going to put all these on YouTube. And so that's kind of the newest way that we're pushing them out. Should have done it from the beginning, but really boiled down to time to get the video file ready. Yeah. Obviously, that's a bigger beast to mess with. It is. A little more time consuming, and thankfully we're busy as a company, and so it's always trying to fit the podcast into everything else that we're doing. Sure. But one of our latest episodes, we've published all the YouTube episodes. Most of them are just the audio file with a graphic over it. A few of them we put the actual video out. But one of the more recent ones we've put up, we haven't publicized it or anything, and it's already gotten a ton of great views, And so it's like,
that's amazing.
That I think is always the learning curve, is figuring out where are the people, and then how do we get in front of them. So, we try and track metrics and all that good stuff, but to me, it's the process. We love the process. We love the conversations. The metrics are a byproduct of that. And, of course, we want it to do valuable things for both us and the community that we serve. But at the end of the day, we're going to do it no matter what.
So you were born here, moved to Dallas, lived there for a while, moved to Denver, came back to Arkansas to open this up. That's what caught my attention earlier. So why move back to Arkansas to tell these stories? Couldn't you have done that in Denver or Dallas?
Sure. And honestly, it was a tough decision to leave Denver. I loved it there. I worked in the snow sports industry with the U.S. ski team, a lot of different professional athletes. It was a ton of fun. I think, like most people, I was in my 20s at the time, late 20s, and kind of just had that urge of what else should I be doing, or should I just be content here, and how big is the world really? And Arkansas always kind of being home. I've had family here my whole life, so coming back for holidays and things like that, there was a familiarity to it, but I really didn't know it from a business standpoint. And so the opportunity came about. I had a friend introduce me to somebody that was based here. They wanted to start a production company. And so I guess fast forward, a dozen years since that first conversation now. And we had a production company for about 6.5 years. And then I ended up we kind of had different ideas and directions we wanted to go. So I left that company to start Content Titan, which is my current company, and kind of doing a lot of the same things, but really expanding our offerings to more content specific as a whole, not just video production. So the way I look at it now is, the way the world is, you can take a piece of video and make infinite number of other pieces of content. So we utilize video as the bread and butter of our services, but we can pretty much put anything anywhere for anybody. And so that's kind of how we landed there. But as far as why Arkansas, again, the connection to the state, a lot of people don't know anything about Arkansas. If you're outside of Arkansas, it's a hidden gem in the middle of the country. I was talking to somebody the other day that's based in Denver, ironically, about this project we're working on, and it's a flyover state, right? I travel a lot as well. I go to both coasts and talk to people all over the place, and they're like, why Arkansas? And first question is, have you been there? Right. And so anybody that's from here and traveled, and you talk to people, and if you ask them if they've been there, 9 out of 10 times they're going to say no, right? So they don't know what we have to offer. It's also a really unique state in that you're kind of one connection away from anybody, right? It's big enough that it has a lot of resources, but it's small enough and close-knit enough that if I need to get a hold of somebody, I bet I could ask one of you guys if you know this person, and chances are you know them or somebody that knows them. So I kind of refer it to, in Hollywood, they call it the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. In Arkansas, it's the 2 degrees of anybody, right? Yes, so you're very well connected very quickly. And I love that about the state. So especially when it comes to podcasting, if I've heard of a great story, but I don't know that person, I mean, it's so easy to get in touch with people.
Yeah. What is your process for finding guests?
A lot of it boils down to, again, the work that we do. We have the luxury of getting connected to a lot of Hall of Famers. We do the Arkansas Business Hall of Fame, Women's Hall of Fame, Outdoor Hall of Fame, Sports Hall of Fame. So if there's a Hall of Fame attached to it, we probably make biographical videos for those inductees. Along the way, you just sort of meet people in those industries that are also doing really interesting things. And then in some cases, people will pitch people to us. We just did the Bruce Murphy, the CEO and founder of Arkansas Heart Hospital. He was on the podcast recently, and he's somebody that has an amazing story. And I didn't have a personal connection to him. I had worked with the Heart Hospital on some projects in the past, but his PR team pitched him to us, and I was like, absolutely, that's a fantastic story and fits right in line with kind of the stories that we like. And I'm always thinking and looking at articles and, lists of the who's who of Arkansas, so to speak, and trying to figure out who would fit time-wise, like who have we not, what industry have we not covered lately. And then I asked my team and pretty much anybody, do you have any ideas or guest people that would make sense? And then, of course, there's the other angle to it, which, I mentioned it's a labor of love in a sense, but of course there's a good marketing component to it for our business. Yeah. And so it allows the opportunity to have conversations with people that we might not otherwise have a reason to have those conversations. Sure. So that's a great marketing angle for us.
And I love, you were talking about repurposing content. I love that at the end of your last season, you took, the best of the shows. Like, I think you get very creative with it. So that's really neat.
Again, that's a tribute to our team. I think, we've got a great team, and they're always finding how can we repurpose content, and everybody wants, when we're sitting down to listen to a podcast, or we're driving the car, or we're mowing the grass, or we're doing laundry around the house, whatever reason that we can kind of be doing this passive listening, we also want sort of more short bursts of active listening. If we're watching, social media or YouTube or whatever, that's a very active thing that we're doing. And so how can we give more value in a shorter amount of time? Let's cut the highlights, the value add content into a shorter piece.
Have you found that any industry has gains more listens or views than others?
Well, I was mentioning, one of the recent episodes we did was with amazing woman. She's her name's Amy Fiedler. She's a captain in the Air Force, call sign Rebel. She's the commander of the Viper demo team, which is the solo F-16.
All cool words. I don't know what that means, but it sounds cool. Yeah.
But she's a 30-year-old woman who has been flying since she was 16, and she's sort of a bit of a national icon within the aviation industry. And long story short, we're working on a big project right now that kind of led us to getting connected with her. And she was gracious enough to be on the podcast. And, people are going nuts for it. It's one of those things that you don't expect anybody to like find or listen to our little podcast. But at the same time, if you roll across the people that have cool enough stories, people just seek that stuff out. So there's no question fighter pilots across the country, especially, last year, the new Top Gun movie came out. And so that's a passion of mine. I'm kind of a not so undercover nerd about it. I'm very vocal about my love of military aviation. Again, growing up, I just had some family members in the Air Force and, was able to stay close to it. My dad used to take me to air shows and all that kind of stuff. So it's one of those things that for me, I can seek out whatever story I want, right? And so I've got a platform that allows me to ask somebody to talk on it. And so that was a big one. We interviewed Governor Hutchinson during the pandemic. I thought it was really interesting that obviously any politician chooses to be in office, but you don't choose to be in office when something like that happens.
Yeah,
and so you still have your regular job to do, but now you're in charge of ensuring the safety and function of the state. And I was curious what that looked like from his perspective. So he was gracious enough to let us interview him and have him on. And of course, that was a good conversation for us to have as well.
That's great.
Wow.
When you're going outside of the state, you said like most people don't really know about Arkansas. They've got, they've been told or saw some few things, in their life. They're like, are you guys wearing shoes yet? That's type of the, interpretation they have of like, what is the picture they have in their mind of Arkansans? When you're interviewing these people for these stories, are you seeing any kind of common threads in between their stories that people don't usually think about, or are they completely original? Like where you grow, obviously we have a lot of farmland, and I call this the town of Arkansas because, like you said, that 2 degrees of separation, it's inherent everywhere you go. But yeah, so everybody has some sort of, rural, connection, I'm sure. But are there any other threads of all these Arkansas stories that you're telling that have a commonality between them that you wouldn't normally think of?
It's a good question. I think, one of the benefits of Arkansas is a lot of people kind of have the opportunity to rise quickly because of their connections, whether it's family connections. My dad was in this industry, therefore I could get in and move up pretty quickly. So you see a lot of younger people that have titles and positions that in other bigger markets, they wouldn't have those yet. A 27-year-old that can be the face of Arkansas rice industry, right? In California, if you wanted to be that person, you're probably a 50-year-old white male, to be honest with you. Yeah. You're not a 27-year-old female. So what I've seen as far as a trend is people have the opportunity to excel quickly here because of those connections, because of, not necessarily just family, but, how many people do you know from U of A that are in Arkansas, right? You went to college with somebody and all of a sudden they're in a job and you can kind of move up the ladder together. I think that happens a lot more here than it does in Dallas or Denver, these bigger markets where you have kind of a melting pot of people where nobody knew each other before. Yeah. You kind of have to create new relationships all the time. And there's not as much just sort of yo-yoing back and forth between, I was at this job, then I went over here to take a promotion, then we came back to my old company. And, because those relationships, as long as you don't burn that bridge, you can move up very quickly and create some really interesting opportunities. And I think that's something that has been really interesting to see, not just through the people on the podcast, but just the work I've done in general in Arkansas, is how quickly people have the opportunity to progress.
For sure. So we talked about the past, we talked about the present, we got to talk about the future of the podcast. Where do you see this thing headed? Do you have any goals set in front of you of like, this is how big I would like to take this?
Sure. I think everybody starts out, or most people, I won't speak for everyone, but I think most people start out with a podcast thinking, I know I have something I want to say, or I want to interview certain people that they have something, and I'm just the mechanism for them to say something, right? Like, I don't really care if I say 2 words on our podcast, to be honest with you. I really care about what our guests have to say. And I'm just a mechanism to create that conversation. And so as far as where we take it from here, I think it's just opening the door. A lot of the people that we've had to this point have been that 1 degree of separation. And I know there's so many great stories out there, so many people doing so many cool things. And though we're based in Arkansas, and of course I want to keep the root of it with Arkansans and people doing cool things in Arkansas, there's no question there's a lot of stories out there. And I've had some great ones on. A producer from Discovery who has done a lot with Shark Week, and they've done some really cool things with Discovery. They were in China in a panda sanctuary dressed in panda suits, just all this stuff. And obviously the fighter pilot that's based in South Carolina but travels all over. We've just had some really interesting people. I do a lot of work in Nashville, Tennessee as well, so we've had some people from there. Somebody that's with Empire Records, doing some really cool stuff in the music industry, the marketing world. You name it, we've talked to some really cool people. So in my mind, it's like, well, how can I top the conversations I've had? But at the same time, I think there's just so many more out there that I just want to keep having fun with it. When it stops being fun, I'll probably stop doing it. Okay. So I think the more I let this be too laborious, then the quicker I'm disassociating myself with it. Because we make content for a living, right? So if I'm going to make more, it better be fun, right? That I'm not necessarily getting paid for. So I don't know of a specific way to answer the question other than the future has to be fun. Yeah. So engaging conversations, people that are doing really cool things. I have a few conversations that I'm really looking forward to. I think for, I don't know what the word is, but just to make sure that I don't jinx it, I'm going to keep them close to the chest. Okay. But, it's just one of those things that as I listen to other podcasts, I'm like, man, I would love to have that guest on my little show or whatever. So we'll see what happens.
Sure. And usually you can, if they're willing to be on somebody's podcast, unless they're just like doing it as a favor for a friend, type of thing. I've reached out because I watched Kevin Smith's podcast, right? And I've reached out to a few of his guests, and that's how I got Marvel and them involved. Just reached out and be like, hey, I saw you on this podcast. Would you like to be on mine? I don't have nearly the viewers, I promise you, but I would love to interview you regardless. And they're usually game about it. Reach out to them however you can. Yeah. As far as the industry of podcasting in Arkansas itself, I know you were at ARKAST last year. I may live in an echo chamber. I don't know. But it seems like we're about to take a turn in podcasting. It seems like we're getting more people. We've always had a lot of people that were interested in it, but it's more than just, oh, you got a blog online? That's sweet. It's sort of getting recognized more often. People are going on THV or they're on the local news and talking about strictly their podcast because they did an episode on whatever. So how do you see that growing in Arkansas, podcasting itself?
Sure. Well, I can speak specific to Arkansas, but then as a bigger conversation as well. When you look back 20 years ago, Facebook was brand new, and other social media channels were not really a thing. But that started the trend of anybody anywhere can have their own media channel. And so over the last 20 years, it's become more and more common, of course, that, used to, there were 4 channels on TV that if you wanted to get your message out, that was it. There were X number of radio stations. If you want to get your message out, that was it. Billboards, traditional media, as we call it. So, of course, over the last 20 years, that's just changed dramatically. And the way we communicate it to a lot of our clients now is you have to be your own media company, right? And so one of the easiest ways to get into it today is through podcasting. It's, again, simple to kind of create the base level. There's infinite number of ways you can improve the quality and output of your content, but to get into it doesn't require much. If I really wanted to, I could take my cell phone, talk into it, and publish a podcast just like that, right? So the accessibility to the industry is so much easier than it ever has been before. And then the accessibility to quality equipment is less expensive than it ever has been before. So anybody who's forward thinking enough to know that they've got a message and they've got an opportunity to create their own channel for that message, it's almost foolish to not start now, right? Every business, every individual that has some sort of voice that they want to put out into the world, there's no reason they shouldn't do it. As far as Arkansas is concerned, I think one of the cool things that I've seen is more and more people are realizing where in the world they kind of fit. They've got their own little compartment of the world that they want to capitalize on. And whether it's in Little Rock, Hot Springs, Northwest Arkansas, Northeast Arkansas, the Delta, whatever part of the world they're in or the state they're in, they can tell the stories of their neighborhood, so to speak, their community. And so, good friend of mine, Bo Counts, who's had his podcast for a long time, he's very niche in his sort of world, but he's the best at it, right? And he can sit down and he can do it. He's got lots of broadcast experience and, but nobody's going to step on his toes, right? So he can kind of keep going in his realm, and then somebody else can come in and talk about whatever else they want to, So I think there's just so many interesting things to talk about. Our state has a great culture, great connection, again, to the people that make it up. So it's easy to cover a lot of ground here.
Well, I always like to ask the question, so what would you say to Arkansans out there who want to start a podcast? But you've already said so many great things, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think don't let the technology scare you. Ironically, we consider ourselves professionals because we do get paid to create content every day, but I won't tell you how many times we're watching how-to YouTube videos as professionals, to figure out how to do something. And so really it takes just a little bit of determination, more so than talent or skill or anything else. You just have to want to do it, and I guarantee you can figure it out in a very short amount of time. So don't let the barrier to entry be a deterrent. It's a lot easier than you think. If you've ever created a Facebook account, an email account, or anything else, chances are, and sent a picture to your parents or grandparents or whoever on your phone, then you can probably figure out how to get a podcast started. And then just go from there. Don't feel like you have to be top notch on your first episode. You can always delete it and start over. But just kind of have fun with it more than anything else.
It's just been really great talking to you. I love how you said you were a storyteller. I love the concept of diverse voices, and to me it's very exciting that who you interview, but also just Arkansas on a larger scale, just getting more voices out there.
And I think that's another key for us is, I don't want to be super linear in the way that it comes across.
Right.
I want male voices, female voices, as many ethnicities as we can get. And sometimes, again, it boils down to time and access to people and everything else. I mean, I just was emailing this morning with someone that I'm really looking forward to having on the podcast. We just haven't synced schedules in a while. And, it's going to be a great diverse voice, both the true diversity, but also the nature of the conversation will be something new to our show. So I think that's what we're always looking forward to is just I don't want to become this broken record of the same message all the time. And I think that's probably one of the easiest things to do is if you're, especially in the podcast world, is, it's fine to be kind of niche in your focus. But I think the key is making sure that within that, you don't just sound too repetitive. Because I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I've certainly listened to some shows before where I listened to an episode, it was great. I listened to the next episode, it was really good. The next episode, I was like, I think I've heard this before, like 2 episodes ago, and it just starts to get a little repetitive. So that's probably one of the bigger challenges is making sure that, you just kind of keep things fresh and not overly consistent to the point that it's too repetitive. From a marketing standpoint, it's great to be repetitive.
Right.
But from a storytelling perspective, we'll watch the same movie a couple of times.
Sure.
But after that,
Yeah.
we want a good long 10-year break before
Right.
we watch it again.
You need the reboot you just yet.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, my only exception, of course, is Top Gun. I can watch that pretty much any time. But
You waited 30-something years for that sequel, though.
it's
so
true.
you're
But
good.
I wore
Yeah.
out the VHS of the
Oh, okay.
original. So.
Yeah.
Very
But
cool.
no. Well, I'm curious to get a little perspective from you guys because, it was a natural extension for me to get started in this because I already was using cameras and microphones and everything anyway. But
Yeah.
I am curious from y'all's perspective, and maybe y'all have talked about it on here before, but how did you get started and what was the learning curve like for y'all?
Yeah. You want to go first?
I can. So we're two separate stories that sort of combined into one path, and then continuing forward from there. Mine, I was a consumer of podcasts, and sort of just like you did. I learned about it, and I have no journalism background whatsoever, but I was like, I really wanted to just reach out, and I took a few entrepreneurship classes when I was opening my business, and they were telling you about if you want to be mentored by anyone, it doesn't hurt to just ask, because a lot of the times people are always too intimidated to do that, and so if they don't get asked, they don't get mentored, and so I started doing that. And then realized, this will also work with podcasting guests. And so I was just doing it sort of like you are. But I was learning from their stories and learning from them. This was my university. I was opening myself for student of one. But releasing it out there, broadcast for the world to go see, learning from people who have the experience of what I wanted to learn about. You know what I mean? And like I completely relate with the mile wide, inch deep type of thing because I want to do everything. You know what I mean? Jack of all trades, master of none type of thing. But I'm just dangerous enough with a little bit, that I can make other things collapse like dominoes. And so, last year I took that. I had a few podcasts along the way, different businesses or people that wanted to partner up, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And last year I had to do some fundraising for an organization, and I really suck at fundraising. And so I was like, well, what's something I can do? What's an event that I could create that I would actually be passionate about and might be able to help this out too? And so that's where we came up with ARKAST. And bringing in podcasters from around the state. And then I was like, I don't even know if anybody's going to care at all. And then when we started putting the flyers out, we got a lot of interest, and people are always, I kept hearing it over and over and over and over. I've got stuff I want to talk about. I'm just not sure how to start. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, that's what we really, really need to focus on then. We need to get you to come in and learn from these people who have done it successfully, like yourself. And that's why we're having these conversations right now. Because there's so much to learn from. So you're asking about the repetitive thing. So like Karen says, she asks the same question usually about every podcast that we have with whatever guest. How did you, the learning curve, how'd you get started? How do you see, those same types of questions, but we get a different answer from everybody, right? So everybody found their own way to what they're doing now by taking a different path. And it's the Wild West right now, right? So like you could literally, we have technology everywhere around us. Like you said, you could just pick up your phone and start hitting record, and you can record your podcast right there. Put it on YouTube. Everything is free. Or you can go all out, like we have the P4 and all that stuff sitting in front of us right now. We've got camera equipment and all this. You've got a personal videographer following you around. You can go as big or small as you want to and still put great content out. So like you said, it's all about the conversations. And so that's sort of how we ended up here. We actually founded a nonprofit organization that is helping podcasters in Arkansas. Specifically, that's what our goal is to bring up the voices of people who feel like they don't have a voice. They can come in, they can record. We want to help them get studio time. We want to help them get promoted and to learn how to do it on their own.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a project I'm very passionate about. I'll go to my background. So I worked for the NPR affiliate for many, many years and loved it. So fell in love with audio storytelling there. And then I went into some other jobs, but it always came back to other jobs. Like I went to the Arkansas Supreme Court where we were doing civics education, and it was always like, well, let's start a podcast to do that. That was always just the means, and it's easy. It's easier than making a video, right? So always had that love, and podcasting is kind of the next generation of public radio to me. And also, when I worked in newsrooms, there was always like, I wish we had a little bit more diversity in making, like you talked about, TV used to be, one way, the nightly news or whatever told us what to think. I love diverse voices. And my hope for Arkansas is that we can get something started that really would serve like a threefold purpose. One is just professional recording equipment, which doesn't have to be really expensive, but allow people to come in and record if they don't have, the means and they want to do that. Educational workshops, because, you can hit record, but sometimes you need a lot of guidance. So educational workshops, and then storytelling events. Those are the kinds of things that I think Arkansas would benefit from and could be a lot of fun. So
I love it. Well, those reminded me of a couple points that I'll hit on real quick, may or may not be valuable, but the first is that I mentioned it's easier than ever. That doesn't make it easy to do this and to put this stuff out. I think the key word I used earlier was determination, right? If you're determined to do it, you can absolutely make it happen. But it does take effort. And the further into it you get, you realize the more you can do, the more effort you can put in, the more equipment, the more time, the more skill. So I think that is important to note. And another thing is I have a philosophy, and this is sort of what I use globally in the work that we do. And, there's numerous ways to create content. But I use a very simple formula. And it's sort of, if you picture an upside down pyramid or triangle. On the top, you kind of divide it into 3 sections. On the top is just document, right? So anytime you're thinking about content creation, the key, and we've all got it in our pocket, or we can hire professionals or do it any way we want to do it, document whatever's happening in your world. Once you've documented a whole bunch of stuff, then we can look at the next phase, which is create, right? So we're not creating anything while we're documenting, we're just capturing. And then we go in and we figure out, all right, now how do we want to edit this or cut this into what we actually want to put out into the world? And then the last piece of the puzzle, which a lot of times people think is where I need to start, and that's the distribute piece. Now we figure out where is this going to go? How are we going to get it there? What platform does this piece of content most need to exist on the most? And if you just kind of frame your mind work around that, or your mindset around that, it's a very simple formula to just constantly remind yourself, let's just document this. Then we'll figure out the next piece of it, not kind of box ourselves in saying, well, I got to do all this before I can even go record anything. So if we keep it simple, then I think that's the easiest way to look at it. And I think I had one more point, but it escaped me. So clearly it wasn't valuable enough.
That always happens to me.
That's right.
I'm sure it was valuable. You'll remember it later. This has been great. Marketing is really hard, I think, for podcasters. You create something and then you don't know how to put it out into the world. Is there a marketing tip that you can give new podcasters?
I think, first of all, define your audience. Who do you want to listen to this? If it's everybody, then you've got to look at, all right, well, where are the channels and how can we get this in front of everybody? But if it's just people who, cook on the grill, all right, well, that's a different approach.
Right.
So that goes into marketing anything, right? So when it comes to marketing your story, your audible ability to put out a message, I think obviously keywording is huge. People search for things, period. So if you want to be found through search, you've got to really put the time and effort into keywording. The newest one for us, which again, I should have done this all along, but YouTube's a great platform. Even if it's just the audio with a graphic on it, people are going to find you oftentimes a lot faster that way than necessarily just a podcasting platform as a whole. So don't skip that. But, again, we chose Buzzsprout because it was an easy way for us to just get the audio uploaded to one place, create accounts for all the different podcasting platforms, and then it pushes it out and does all the work for you so that you're not having to go to multiple platforms or anything like that. So, and tell people about it. I think that's one of the things we don't do enough is invite people into what we're doing and ask for their support. People are always wanting and willing to support you. I think you just have to make the ask. And a lot of times we feel like, I don't want to burden somebody or whatever, but if somebody asks me to help them share something or do something, I mean, if there's a penny's worth of relational capital there, I think I'm going to jump in and do it, as long as it's not requiring, a whole day of my time, I'd be happy to. and I think we all feel the same way.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I learned a lot. So, I think we all did. So.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me.
Sure.
This was fun for me, and again, it's not often that I get on this side of the question and answer side of things. So I'm sure that's the common theme with most of y'all's guests here is it's kind of fun to talk about it from this side of the table.
Right, kind of throws you off, which makes good natural conversation though. You don't have time to script this.
Well, I'll add this one little anecdote at the end, and it's when you're trying to figure out what you want to do in life. And for me, that was in college, of course, like most people, and choose a major, and it was business management, right? So I knew I kind of wanted to be in the business world and manage business, right? Whatever that means. But then throughout my initial educational journey in college, I then realized, maybe I like this mass communication side of things as well. And that's the radio, TV, newspaper, all that kind of stuff. So I ended up dual majoring in both of those. And when I got out of college, I wanted to own a coffee shop. Probably a lot of college kids, you just spend so much time there, and you're like, I just kind of want to own this and keep a simple life. So I kind of went a whole different direction. But I used management and mass communications in that small business endeavor. But I didn't realize that one day I would, own a business that I'm using all those business skills for. But then the product of that business is the communication piece, right? And so being able to talk to people for a living and run and manage a business, it kind of all came together. But I had no idea that my actual voice would be the thing that generates income for the business, if that makes sense. And so it's really interesting. I think especially for younger people, you don't have to know even early on what you want to do or how you want to do it. It can change, it can mold, it can shift. The key is, just kind of keep those little things in the back of your mind of what you want to do and how you want to do it. But don't ever lose sight of what's possible. Right. And, when it comes to podcasting, content creation, all that kind of stuff, most of these 20-somethings these days are growing up with this stuff. And so it's like nothing to them. Yeah. And for the rest of us old people, it's something where we constantly have to adapt and mold and figure out what's the next thing. And so one of the biggest things we're doing is constantly figuring out what's next. Like you guys asked earlier, what's next for the podcast? The thing is, if podcasts go away one day, which I don't think they will for a long time, that's okay. This is our platform right now, but we're constantly going to be looking for and trying to figure out what's next and be where the people are. That's kind of the core mentality. So if video cameras and microphones are no longer needed, if we all have a chip implanted in our brain that uploads the information, and then we'll figure that out as it comes. But for now, this is a great opportunity for us, great way for us to tell stories, and of course a great platform for us to put those stories out on.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for being here, and also for planning the idea of hive mind podcasting. That's amazing. You started that.
I'll take credit.
That nightmare.
Then we don't have to actually record it and put it out. It just interconnects.
Yeah. Can I change the channel?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. We'll get used to it.
That's right.
All right.
I love it.
Well, thank you, Nate, so much for being here. And when we asked you to be on here, it was like, I don't know if we can get Nate on here. Though. He does his own stuff.
No, I'm happy to do it. It was a lot of fun. So I really appreciate it, guys.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, we appreciate you.